How does a dictator live? What's the everyday life like of an assassin who has the power of life and death over millions of people? What are the habits, the obsessions, the whims of these men capable of subjecting an entire population to their destructive madness? A Day in the Life of a Dictator offers a close look at the intimate life of the three most murderous dictators of the 20th century. Stalin, the totalitarian dictator, cold and methodical calculator. Idi Amin Dada, the impulsive dictator, brutal and superstitious. Muammar Gaddafi, the ultra-rich tyrant, a depraved megalomaniac. We will see them as they live with their wives, their mistresses, their accomplices, their assassins. By penetrating for the first time into their fortresses, their homes, their bedrooms, into the heart of their intimate lives. We gained access to these highly private areas, which we filmed and then reconstituted thanks to new technologies. Then, we introduced actors to play the roles of the dictators. But also, for the first time in a historical documentary, we integrated the dictators themselves with footage taken from live archival material. We have thus recreated actual scenes in the daily life of these three dictators, reenacted in their original settings. The recreation of these three historic days has also been achieved with the help of historians and exclusive interviews of the dictators' entourage and members of their families.
Дело все в том, что Сталин любил власть. полная, абсолютная власть.
فكان جدا في سر غامض لأنه هو كان لا يثق في أحد وليس هو عبقري هو كان يخاف.
He was scared that something can happen to his life. People were scared of him, and also he was scared of the people.
We will thus go into the wings of absolute power, and we will live hour by hour through a crucial day for the three dictators at a turning point in their reigns. 3 decisive days, 3 different faces of dictatorship to understand how one man's thirst for power can shatter the destiny of an entire people. Soviet Union, Thursday, November 24th, 1938. A few kilometers south of Moscow, the courier from the Kremlin has just delivered the dispatches to Stalin's dacha. Insanely paranoid, Stalin lives hidden away in the middle of the forest. His residence is protected by anti-aircraft batteries and a security force of 300 soldiers. No one is permitted to enter the dacha without the dictator's specific permission. Only Valentina, his governess, has the right of access throughout. Every morning, as usual, she brings him his dispatches. At 7 a.m., the dictator is still up. He has spent all night verifying a list that sentences 3,178 people to death or deportation. A long and painstaking task, which is far from over, but Stalin is a meticulous man. He takes his time, ticking off the names of the condemned one by one.
Чудовище. Компьютер, который, когда-то приняв решение, что он эту власть получит в руки, он ее уже никому упускать не хотел.
At 60, and at the peak of his power, he controls everything. He leads an austere life. Nothing interests him beyond exercising his own power.
Но 5 или 6, там сколько там дач было, много всего. Дело все в том, что Сталин любил власть. И больше ему не нужно было ничего. Власть. Полная, абсолютная власть.
Stalin has reigned over the USSR for 10 years. Comprised of 15 republics, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics occupies 1/6 of the world's landmass and extends over 11 time zones. It is the biggest empire of all time. At this stage of his life, he is a cold, insensitive man. Stalin, the name that he chose during the Russian Revolution, means the man of steel. Stalin is the ultimate totalitarian dictator. He is convinced he has been chosen by Providence to transform society and build an ideal world, communism. He wants to create the new man, disciplined, obedient, hardworking, and blindly obedient to the party, meaning to Stalin. To accomplish this colossal project, Stalin must destroy everything before he can rebuild it, eradicate all privileges, eliminate all traitors, and if necessary, he is prepared to exterminate half of the population. For a year and a half, he has put into place a scientific system of massive elimination that is called the Great Purge. Between July 1937 and November of 1938, he has had 800,000 Russians executed, 1,500 victims per day, one every 57 seconds. At the end of November 1938, Stalin has attained absolute power. He has exterminated all his enemies, whether real or imagined. It is time to stop the bloodbath before his people realize that he is nothing but a murderous madman. To absolve himself of any guilt, Stalin will accuse the chief of the secret police, Nikolai Yezhov, the man known as the bloodthirsty midget, of having committed these crimes behind his back. Yezhov obeys him like a dog and has tortured and assassinated thousands of innocent people with his own hands. Soon it will be his turn to face torture and death. Stalin has summoned Yezhov to his office at 6 p.m. It is 7:30 a.m. Stalin has finally finished his daily 16-hour workload. He lies down on the sofa in his office and sleeps peacefully for a few hours before putting his plan into action. As he says himself, the greatest of pleasures is to choose one's victim, prepare one's blow, wreak one's vengeance, then go to bed. Libya, Friday, June 28, 1996. Muammar Gaddafi, guide of the Libyan revolution, awakens in the luxurious bedroom of one of his numerous villas. It is 8 a.m. and like every morning, Gaddafi has a hard time getting up. As opposed to Stalin's austere life, he is totally dominated by his impulses and suffers from numerous addictions, mind-altering drugs, alcohol, and sex. But at 54, his body is wearing down, having been subjected to every kind of excess for far too long. As a result, it is increasingly difficult for him to maintain his self-control in public. People are frequently perplexed by his erratic behavior. Mitterrand judged him unstable. Ronald Reagan referred to him as a mad dog, and to Anwar al-Sadat, he was just plain crazy. Nevertheless, it is this sex maniac and drug addict who rules Libya with an iron fist. For 27 years, he's been systematically plundering his country's wealth, beginning by confiscating the colossal oil and gas revenues, and then appropriating all big business concerns and redistributing them to his entourage. Today, although he is one of the richest men in the world, his home is half buried underground, surrounded by bulletproof walls and watchtowers, with soldiers standing guard 24 hours a day. Not only is part of this residence underground, but it is also hidden inside the perimeter of an ultra-secure compound, Bab al-Azizia, which covers 6 square kilometers. An entire city within a city, located in the heart of Tripoli, a huge area surrounded by walls, a veritable modern fortress. Mohamed Gliwan, Gaddafi's personal cameraman, is part of the dictator's innermost circle.
داخل باب العزيز داخل سياج كان في سياج داخل سياج يعني كانت في بوابة تمنع أي حد يمشي إلا المطلوب اللي بدها اللي هي قريبة من العائلة مثلا أنا مصور دكتور طباخ كانوا أشخاص معينين يدخلوا للدائرة اللي موجود فيها بيتها يعني بيتها أصلا بيت عائلته يعني.
And even within this fortress, the exact location of Gaddafi's home is kept a secret.
تخيل هم داخل باب العزية وداخل معسكر ولكن مش كل شخص يعرف بيت القذافي وين. فكان القذافي سر غامض لأنه هو كان لا يثق في أحد وليس هو عبقري هو كان يخاف.
Fear became an obsession with Gaddafi after the Americans bombed his palace in 1986. Suspected of funding many terrorist attacks around the world that resulted in hundreds of victims, he became public enemy #1. Since then, he has lived constantly on the alert, like a fugitive inside his own country. But now, in 1996, Gaddafi is threatened by a new enemy, the National Front for the Liberation of Libya, comprised of armed Islamist groups that are based in the desert and have declared war on him. Gaddafi takes this threat very seriously. They are Salafists, suspected of being linked with Al-Qaeda. He has already had hundreds of them arrested and imprisoned in Abu Salim prison. Living conditions there are horrendous. Fatih Saad was imprisoned there during that time. For 12 years, he witnessed what the prisoners had to undergo.
النوع المادي يعاملك يعذبك عذاب بالضرب بالكهرباء بالتعليق اليدين في أعلى وتقعد يوم كامل معلق بين يديك من أعلى تعذيب إن تنام على البلاط بدون زليز احنا نقول البلاط وبعد ذلك يصب عليك مية سخونة في أثناء الليل هذا المادي شعوري بالإحباط عارف أنت اللي يقبض عليه أنا متأكد إن اللي يقبض عليه القذافي ينتهي.
Conditions inside were really brutal. The jail cells were overcrowded. The people who died were often left in the cells for days. And torture was institutional. People felt like there was no way out, that they were buried alive in this prison. They felt like they were in a prison where the keys had been thrown away.
This Friday, June 28th, the prisoners can't take any more. They have reached their limit. For days, dead bodies have been left to rot inside their cells. They have nothing to lose. Today, Gaddafi will soon have to deal with a completely unprecedented situation. In 27 years of absolute power, he has never had to face the kind of massive revolt that is about to break out at Abu Salim. This date will never be forgotten in the bloody history of Libya under Gaddafi's rule. Uganda, Tuesday, March 26, 1974. This morning, Tuesday, March 26, 1974, Amin Dada once again awakens out of a nightmare. Killers were trying to assassinate him at home during the night, and these killers were his own soldiers. Like Gaddafi and Stalin, he sleeps very little. For these paranoid men, night brings out their worst fears, especially for Amin Dada, who lives in an irrational world where the spirits of his dead enemies come to haunt him and are seeking revenge. In addition, there are fears that are all too real. 3 years ago, as an army general, he succeeded in overthrowing his predecessor by a coup d'etat. Now he himself is afraid of being overthrown. To maintain power and protect himself, he has unleashed a reign of terror throughout the country. Any dream of his deemed premonitory can result of hundreds of arrests and executions on the very same day.
He was scared that something can happen to his life because how he was ruling. People were scared of him, and also he was scared of the people.
Everyone is subjected to the repression, starting with his closest collaborators, who start to disappear one after the other.
Everybody in Uganda, members of the armed forces, police, and the public, they are responsible for my security. And immediately they hear anybody making subversive activities or try to plan anything against me, they report that person straight to the police.
And the methods employed by Amin's police are extremely brutal. Victims are clubbed to death, burned in the savannah, their bodies thrown to the crocodiles in the Nile, or shot publicly, wearing white aprons to highlight the blood. Choked with their own penises stuffed down their throats, and some even dynamited in groups. In 3 years, he has already had more than 150,000 Ugandans massacred. But unlike Stalin and Gaddafi, Amin personally participates in the repression. His home is situated only a few meters from the principal center of detention and torture. To enter without being seen, Amin has had a tunnel built. He tortures the victims himself, and then usually finishes them off with a sledgehammer. Amin is suspicious of everyone, and especially of his entourage. His daughter recalls how he spent nights in surveillance of his own soldiers.
He wasn't sleeping so much. He can sleep especially during daytime, but during the night, he can just be there on the balcony. He takes off the light, watching the soldiers, how they are patrolling. You know, a place like State House, as is there are bushes, so many trees, things like that. He must fear. You must fear also your own soldiers. Because he thought that as his staff, they can do him bad. You see? And it was correct. They told him that the people who are going to overthrow you are those people whom you are working with. That's why when you are president, don't trust people near. Love them, but don't trust them.
Like Stalin and Gaddafi, Amin had seized power by force. All of the dictators were caught up in the same spiral of violence. They were suspicious of everybody and could trust nobody, especially those closest to them, who were best positioned to assassinate them. Because of this tremendous pressure, they would progressively plunge into madness and paranoia. He doesn't know it yet, but today Idi Amin has good reason to be afraid. His own cousin, General Arube, with whom he grew up and who he had appointed Brigadier General of the army, is planning to overthrow him. As he would later tell his son, Jafar Amin, he was about to live through the most difficult day of his reign.
The issue of the push attempt by his very own tribe the Kakwa, we are Kakwas, was the most painful situation for my father. Charles Arubey was more or less a brother. As a cousin, he was very much a brother.
In addition to all the atrocities he has committed, now Amin will have to go one step further, go against a member of his own family. It is 10 a.m. Stalin has slept barely 3 hours. Despite his immense popularity, the little father of the peoples, worshipped by the entire world, lives like a lone wolf in his huge dacha. The villa has several living rooms and a dozen or so bedrooms which remain empty and where he never sets foot. Since his wife died 6 years ago, Stalin has totally isolated himself. Although once surrounded by friends and stepfamily, today there is only one person he trusts, his housekeeper, Valentina. She is the one who looks after him daily. Utterly faithful, illiterate, naive, always in good spirits, she has no interest whatsoever in politics. She also secretly shares the dictator's bed. This relationship would last until his death.
Ее функции, она делала все. То есть она не готовила, нет, но она подавала, принимала, меняла постель, укладывала его. Она делала для него все. Она у него была правая рука.
Valentina is the only person who knows all the dictator's weaknesses. Behind his image as the invulnerable leader, Stalin has fragile health and suffers from chronic throat infections, psoriasis, and arteriosclerosis, which need daily treatments.
Сталин был маленького роста. Во-вторых, у него была одна сухая рука. В детстве он попал под трамвай, в аварию, в общем. Рука была сухая, и он ее так как-то держал. В-третьих, он был рябой. Он переболел оспой, и эти рябинки остались. Любила она его страшно, она любила его безумно. И, видимо, это был его тип женщины. Она такая была русская красавица. С толстой попой, с русой косой. И такая хохотушка. Иногда она от него делала аборты. Все об этом знали. Все об этом знали, потому что она куда-то уезжала, там на 3 дня, через 3 дня она приезжала.
Now Stalin lives alone with Valentina, but previously he had been married twice. His first wife died of an illness when she was very young. His second wife, Nadia, had 2 children with Stalin. When she was alive, the 2 step-families would often come to the dacha for picnics. Those were happy times. But in 1932, Nadia committed suicide by shooting herself in the heart. During 13 years of marriage, she had progressively discovered who the man she married really was.
Наверное, что-то она стала понимать, потому что стали пропадать люди, которые были в их окружении. Стали пропадать люди. Наверное, она же была не идиотка, она была соображала, в чем тут дело. И она поняла, что, в общем, он не так прост, как кажется.
Right up to the end, out of loyalty to her husband, Nadia kept her suffering to herself. But before committing, she confided to her brother and sister-in-law, Alexander's parents.
Обращенное к отцу и маме. Письмо о том, что она вынуждена была осуществить этот поступок, потому что с Иосифом она жить больше не может, а спрятаться от него она тоже не может, потому что он ее найдет везде.
When talking of his wife, he used to say, "She left me like an enemy. She left me crippled for the rest of my life."
Она его бросила. Она его бросила, он ее любил. Предательство по отношению к себе. Она его предала. Сталин, наверное, закрылся. Сталин, наверное, закрылся. И дальше уже он пережил это.
It was this event that caused Stalin to lose all human feeling. He began to develop a hatred for her entire family, which he systematically eliminated.
Что же касается характера Иосифа Виссарионовича, то это двуликий Янус, который переступит через все на свете, в том числе через вас, было написано. Черную по белому.
And it is precisely on this day in November 1938 that Evgenia, Alexander's mother, is about to make a mistake that will prove fatal. It's 11 a.m. in Bab al-Azizia. Gaddafi is in his bathroom preparing to start the day. Several young women are in attendance, taking care of his every need. They take his blood pressure daily, they massage him, apply makeup, and dye his hair to cover the bald spots. But at 54, Gaddafi can't abide the premature aging of his face, marked by excesses of every sort, and which bears no resemblance to the young man who took power 25 years ago. At that time, the international press had referred to him as the Arab Kennedy. And his good looks had played an essential part in his popularity and success. But he can't count on his seductive charms any longer. A few weeks ago, he underwent plastic surgery for the first time. It took place in the middle of the night in a high-security clinic built in a bunker underneath his house. The surgeon was Brazilian, not one Libyan was present, and Gaddafi refused a general anesthesia in order to remain conscious during the operation.
Dentro do palácio eu não vi nenhum líbio, tudo estrangeiro. A maioria de origem eslava, russo, iugoslavo, que não existia a antiga Iugoslávia, paquistaneses, indianos. Líbio mesmo, dentro do bunker eu não conheci nenhum. Né? Quem matou Indira Gandhi foi um indiano. Quem matou Saddam foi um egípcio. E ele tinha medo de que um líbio o matasse. É um dos motivos que não tinha líbio dentro do bunker. Então eu acho que ele não quis anestesia geral também.
All his life, Gaddafi would continue to have plastic surgery performed without a general anesthesia. Obsessed with his image, Gaddafi is constantly reinventing himself according to the political role he wishes to play. Soldier of the revolution, patron of international terrorism, self-proclaimed leader of the Arab countries, and even African king of kings. There is no limit to his arrogance and megalomania.
يعني مشاكس يبي يطلع قدام العالم بأي طريقة. هو يلبس خالف تعرف، مش عارف متى هذا يعرفوه ولا. هو لما يلبس أشياء غريبة الناس بتهتم له، الصحافة تهتم له. بس يعني رفع رفع باليوغوسلافيا. أنت بتعرف طائرة يوشن ترفع يوغوسلافيا لمجرد الشو، بس لمجرد انه باش يهتموا به الاعلام ويصوروا. هو كان شخص يشعر بالنقص. انا نلاحظ ان هذا الرجل ما يبيش حد افضل منه. ربما الفقر اللي عاشوا فيه كان سبب لي عقد نفسية وكبرت معاه. هذا الرجل عاش مرحلة في عمره كانت متعبة جدا، فاضطر أنه ينتقم من هذا الشعب، وأنا نشوف فيه ينتقم يوميا.
Gaddafi came from a Bedouin family. They lived in a tent in a desert area near the town of Sirte, a region considered almost uninhabitable where young Muammar tended the goats. His father worked as a servant for a powerful family. They were considered second-class Libyans. Gaddafi would never forget that. His cousin, Said Gaddafi el-Dam, shared the misery of his childhood.
Well, tribe, those days, respect the strong and the rich. He was not strong and not rich, and he had a tough, hard life in the beginning. I think this is one of the reasons he makes against the people after. The whole society. It's deep inside. It's his personality.
When he was only 10, Gaddafi decided to escape the poverty in his family's life and go to school in the city. He climbed on a truck and arrived in Sirte. Alone and destitute, he slept outside and survived on dates. When he returned to his village a few years later, he returned as a hero. He had become Colonel Gaddafi, the man who had just led the revolution and freed his people from the monarchy of old King Idris, who had reigned for 52 years. From the start, Gaddafi knew how to play up that childhood scenario to his advantage, arranging interviews with his family for Libyan television programs, later to be picked up by foreign networks, where he played the humble man who owes everything to his strong character and to his courage.
Enfant, j'étais berger et j'emmenais paître les troupeaux de moutons et de brebis. Je me souviens de la pauvreté dans laquelle se trouvait toute la région.
Moi et son oncle, nous étions bergers. J'ai délaissé les études pour devenir berger. Tout le monde poussait Muammar à arrêter ses études et à venir aider sa famille qui vivait dans la misère. Il a refusé et a continué à étudier.
25 years later, Gaddafi and his family controlled all the refineries and were at the head of all the biggest companies in the country. Only after his death would his people learn that the humble Bedouin and his children had lived in utter luxury. At the end of his life, his personal fortune was estimated at $144 billion. The little desert shepherd had become one of the richest men in the world. Amin Dada also plundered his country. He collects luxury cars and spends limitless amounts of money. He is hardly ever in his office and spends a great deal of his time at his villas in the company of his mistresses.
They had so many wives. You see? Most of the homes she had, she must have a wife there.
It is estimated that Amin Dada had at least 40 children. But even Babi Salamshida, the daughter of one of his 3 legitimate wives, can't remember exactly how many brothers and sisters she had.
We are staying with my 6, 4, the one who died, 4 again, 8. Let me say, Shombe, I think 22.
After 3 years of wielding absolute power, Amin can finally have everything he was deprived of in his childhood.
My father came from the lowest rank in the community. And he was simply saying, I'm an example of a sharecropper, somebody who used to slash sugar cane as a child, becoming a head of state. So it is possible. He lived the colonial era, and out of the blue, he came to power. But he had served and lived the colonial era.
Amin belonged to the Kakwa tribe, a tribe living in a remote desert region of Uganda. His father abandoned the family when Amin was still very young. His mother practiced witchcraft. She raised her son on her own in an irrational world dominated by spirits. To survive, she moved in with a soldier in the British colonial regiment. But the other soldiers on the base kept taunting her and finally drove her and her son away. The two lived in utter misery until Amin had no choice but to sign up with the very regiment that had humiliated him. At 18, he was only a kitchen boy, but he quickly climbed the ranks. A few years later, he became one of the only black officers in the colonial army who had noticed Amin's strength and potential for violence. In charge of putting down the revolts of the rebel tribes, he reverted to terror tactics and torture.
It was the methods he used to cut off the genitals of the culprits and humiliate them.
After independence and the departure of the British in 1962, Amin continues his ascent and becomes commander of the Ugandan army under President Milton Obote. But his ambition does not end there. After several assassination attempts, he finally succeeds in overthrowing Obote and seizes power on January 25, 1971.
Idi Amin wasn't well educated, but he had a lot of intelligence, natural intelligence, and he managed to maneuver his ways to the complete amazement of those who were with him.
Now it is Amin who has the power.
You've said you wanted to teach Britain a lesson, President. Why is that? Does this mean the end of the friendship with Britain?
And that is now a lesson I'm teaching the British.
With a certain irony, he finds provocative ways to humiliate his previous masters. He obliges British businessmen to kneel and declare allegiance to him. He has his throne carried by 4 white men. He even goes as far as bestowing official British Army medals upon himself.
In order to make it absolutely clear to you, I have been honored by the highest order of the conqueror of the British imperialism in Uganda.
Without a qualm, Amin invents the most fantastic titles for himself. He proclaims himself president for life, king of Scotland, and his megalomania reaching delirious proportions, lord of all the animals in the world and of all the fish in the sea. At 1.95 meters, 125 kilos, Amin Dada is a veritable force of nature, a colossus who overwhelms everyone. His outstanding physique and his sense of showmanship make him very popular. Right from the start, cameras from around the world are focused on this eccentric and unpredictable individual who thinks nothing of being interviewed in his swimming pool wearing pajamas.
I do both politics and sports, and even tactics I use in sport by knocking out people I use in politics also.
In his youth, Amin was boxing champion of Uganda 8 times straight. Amin is the strongest man in the country. He is Big Daddy, reassuring and frightening at the same time. And if his eccentricities amused his people and the media, they also served as a smokescreen for his crimes. It is 12:30 p.m. Amin has just learned something that has made him furious. His 3 wives have been partying all night with their bodyguards. Neglected by their husband, they wanted to provoke him. but could not have imagined the risk they were taking. Amin will not tolerate this insult and decides to take revenge. He rushes to the radio station to reveal the indecent behavior of his wives to the whole country. He shouts, "My wives are unfaithful. They have betrayed me. They have destroyed my political work. I repudiate them. I divorce them this very day. They must leave the house." On hearing these declarations, the three wives hurriedly pack their suitcases and flee from the house to escape Amin's anger. When they come home from school, the children don't understand what's happening.
I remember we are preparing to come back home. So when we came from school, we found that all us, my mother and our stepmothers, they weren't at home. Then they told us with the maids, "Hey, where is mommy?" They said, "No, they've packed up their things, they've gone." So we were shocked. You see, and even you couldn't even ask our father, because also he was just looking at us. We were fearing to ask. Yeah, we were at school.
A few months later, Malyamu, Babi's mother, was badly hurt in an accident. She managed to escape from Uganda and take refuge in London. Her daughter would not see her again for more than 30 years. Nora was spared for political reasons. She belongs to a tribe that Amin is persecuting. He spares her to absolve himself of all responsibility. Kay would not be as lucky. A year later, she was found. The children found out about this horror on television.
We were playing out. So they called us to go and take shower. Then our sisters came running and said, "Oh, you come and watch on the television. Mama Kay also is dead." So the sister, my sister Kide, is the firstborn of Mama Kay. She started crying. Then she was cut in pieces. It was very hard. It was very hard for us. It was something strange.
It is the Minister of Health himself who was ordered by Amin to have the victim's body sewn back together.
He directed that the body be sewn, the parts be sewn back the way they should have been, which we did at the hospital. The children had to go to see the body of their mother. It's a very traumatic experience for them at that age.
Amin takes advantage of the event for a macabre display. He has Kay's stitched-up body exposed in front of the hospital for all the crowd to see, and even forces her own children to look at it. In front of everyone, he shouts, "Your mother, you see, was a loose woman. Look at what happened. This is how those who blaspheme against Allah are punished." Babi Salamshida still remembers the moment when she saw her stepbrothers and sisters come home from the hospital.
They were just crying, unhappy. They were no longer playing with us. And sometimes they say that we miss our mother. For you, you have your mother. For us, we don't have we no longer have any mother.
It is 1 p.m. In his office, Stalin receives Evgenia, his sister-in-law, who has come to pay him an unexpected visit. Evgenia is the sister of his second wife, Nadia, the one who committed. Since this tragic event, Stalin detests all of his in-laws. He receives Evgenia coldly. Evgenia is frightened. Part of her family has already been executed or sent to the Gulag by Stalin. She even suspects he is responsible for poisoning her husband a few days earlier. Yet, in spite of the danger, Evgenia has come to give him a letter from Maria, another of Stalin's sister-in-laws, who he has sent to the Gulag for no apparent reason. Living conditions in Stalin's gulags in Siberia are terrible. Up to 50 degrees below zero in the winter, a 12-hour workday, not enough food. Prisoners die of cold, hunger, disease, exhaustion, and despair. From her gulag, Maria has managed to get a letter to her sister-in-law begging Stalin to set her free. She writes, "If I don't get out of this camp, I will die here." Many years later, Evgenia described the scene to her son, Alexander.
Сталин прочитал это письмо и попросил маму больше никогда такие поручительства на себя не брать. Мама говорила, он не стучал ногами, но он мне сказал это таким голосом. Вот достаточно было ему вот какой-то придать своему голосу.
In fact, Stalin hated any pleading for those he had classified once and for all as his enemies. Not only would Maria not be freed, she would be transferred to a camp that was even worse and be executed several months later. And since Stalin never forgot an insult, he would retaliate against Evgenia by sending her to the Gulag a few years later. Almost all of Stalin's family were victims of his murderous insanity. Pavel, brother of his second wife Nadia, poisoned on the 2nd of November 1938. Evgenia, his wife, and Kira, their daughter, sent to the Gulag in 1947. Anna, the elder sister of Stalin's first wife, 6 years in the Gulag. Her husband, Stanislav, shot the 12th of February, 1940. Alexander, his first wife's brother, shot the 20th of August, 1941. His wife, Maria, and her sister, Mariko, shot together in March 1942. Not counting all his close friends who disappeared one after the other.
Тирания или это не тирания? Как вы считаете? Ну, посадить всю свою семью. Я считаю, что это...
Stalin himself grew up in a family atmosphere of insecurity and violence. He was the only survivor of 3 children. His father, a shoemaker, was an alcoholic and regularly beat his son. He died when Stalin was 10. His mother, a housekeeper, noticed his intelligence early on and managed to enroll him in a seminary so he could become a priest. A brilliant student, he would complete 8 years of studies before being expelled because of his subversive ideas. He had just discovered Marxism. Then he became passionately committed to the revolutionary struggle against the Tsar. Stalin killed people with his own hands and became the head of a Bolshevik gang that robbed banks, plundered villages, and planned assassinations to finance Lenin's party. When the Bolsheviks came to power, Lenin made him one of the top party officials. Nevertheless, before his death, Lenin wanted to prevent him from becoming his successor. In his will, he would write, "Stalin is much too brutal. He must be stopped from taking power." From a clinical point of view, Joseph Stalin, Amin Dada, and Muammar Gaddafi all had the 3 characteristics of a psychopath. They all suffered from the violence, misery, and humiliation they experienced as children and became profoundly antisocial. They also suffered from the absence of a father, a physical absence for Stalin and Amin, who lost their fathers early on, and a symbolic absence for Gaddafi, son of a weak and humiliated man who abandoned him. When psychopaths descend further and further into madness, they are seeking the limits that have never been imposed on them by a father, and inflicting death on thousands of people is the ultimate step in transgressing those limits. Like Stalin, every day Gaddafi signs the lists of people who are sentenced to prison or to death. He tolerates no argument. He used to say, all those who oppose the regime, and especially the Islamists, must be treated like cockroaches and deserve to be eradicated without trial.
كان يجيبوا لها هو في بريد ورقة مكتوبة فيكتبوا لها فيها مثلا علي الكيلاني مثلا إقامة جبرية في البيت فهو حسب المزاج يعني هذا بيقول يروح هذا بيقول يبقى هذا يعني كان قاضي وضابط شرطة ورئيس دولة وكل شيء كان.
From the moment he took power, he put in place a brutally repressive regime. But it was in 1984, after barely escaping an attempted assassination, that he decided to televise the trials and public executions so as to terrify the entire population.
The
first of these trials was that of this young student, being judged before an enraged crowd, and whose only crime was to have studied abroad. A mock tribunal accuses him of having made contact with figures of the opposition in the United States, and even to have trained in Morocco to prepare an assassination attempt on Gaddafi. Hoping to save his life, the student confesses to everything, but as in all corrupt trials, the result is a foregone conclusion.
It's an event that shocked every Libyan because I think it's at that moment that they understood just how far the Gaddafi regime was willing to go to instill terror into their own people.
The entire population felt threatened, even people at the highest level.
وبالتالي من يخالف رأي معمر القذافي سيتعرض لأقول الإهانة للسجن للتعذيب وحتى القتل.
And yet, Gaddafi had been a young revolutionary who rose to power at the age of 27 as the defender of great causes. To unify the Arab countries, to free Libya from foreign occupation by nationalizing the oil companies, to restore independence and pride to his country. The Libyans saw him as the great liberator, another Nasser. Like Stalin and Amin Dada, building national pride and achieving greater social justice were the two main themes that served to consolidate his power.
الجميع وأنا يعني متأكد من هذا الكلام شباب شيب نساء رجال صاروا وراء معمر القذافي جاءنا بمثاليات السعادة الخير الهناء حب الآخرين إلى آخره وبدأ يبث في أفكاره كانت أفكار مثالية إذن الجميع سار وراء معمر القذافي.
But the honeymoon with his people is soon over. Now he is afraid of his people. He can't even stand being touched by them. And when he is obliged to mingle with the crowds, while pretending to enjoy it, he hits his bodyguards if they let anyone come too close.
يضرب حتى في الحرس بتاعه بالقراعة حولك يا كلب حولك يا كلب.
لما يمسكوا يده كان يخاف انه يغتالوه او كانوا يمسكوه فكان بيضرب الحارس على اساس انه يبعدوا هؤلاء الناس يعني كل ما ضغطوا الناس وصلوا ليه كل ما كان يضرب.
Gaddafi has lost all contact with his people. Now he only communicates with them on television. Today, as he does several times each week, he is getting ready to record one of his interminable speeches, which has most Libyans yawning. But at last, when he is about to begin, his secretary interrupts him with the news that a revolt has just broken out at Abu Salim prison. Gaddafi doesn't take the alert seriously. Abu Salim is an ultra-high security prison, and he is confident that his powerful police force can put down the rebellion. But what is happening in the prison is far worse than he thinks.
هو كانت في يوم جمعة باهي الساعة 1 ظهرا عندما كانوا يوزعون في الطعام. العنبر الرابع كان فيه موتى داخل في السجن، وكانوا في الموتى في داخل الحجرات مخلينهم تعذيبا لإجماع السجناء. كان حتى صنتهم ورائحتهم كريهة وكلها. فعندما فتح عليهم الباب خرجوا من الباب وشدوا السجان وأخذوا منه المفتاح وضربوه على رأسه.
هيا ولادي، هيا شباب، تحرير أسرى مثل ما قال الرئيس يفرضوا علينا.
Gaddafi has no idea that at this very instant, what is happening in the prison will cause endless repercussions until the day he dies. After having divorced his 3 wives this morning, Amin must now confront his cousin, General Charles Arube. He wants to see him in person, to read in his eyes the signs of betrayal which he has been warned about. Arube represents everything he detests. He is an elegant and cultivated man, an intellectual who has been educated in England. He poses a real threat to Amin because Arube has the support of a large part of the regular army. The situation is even more delicate because he is dealing with a member of his own family. Amin begins by accusing him outright. He says that he knows about his cousin's plot and that he won't get away with it. But Arube remains unperturbed. He doesn't try to defend himself. Instead, he criticizes Amin's reign of terror that has swept the country. Amin explodes with anger. No one has ever dared to defy him like this. He is the chief now, and if Arube says one more thing against him, he can have Arube executed on the spot. But Arube remains impassive. Amin realizes that his cousin is determined and that he has perhaps underestimated his underlying strength. He has no choice. He must eliminate him. So his attitude changes. He pretends to want a reconciliation. He says to him, "You are my brother, a Kakwa like me. Let us make peace. Leave here in peace, and may God protect you." The 2 men pretend to be reconciled, but they know that an armed confrontation is inevitable and that in the outcome, one of them will die. As soon as Arube is out of the room, Amin summons the head of his mercenaries and orders him to assemble his men to pursue Arube and assassinate him.
If Amin himself gave the order for you to be eliminated, they can come anywhere with everybody watching. They wouldn't care.
As every day, in the early afternoon, Stalin is at work in his office at the Kremlin. This little room is the center of the empire. From all 4 corners of the country, millions of civil servants supply the dictator with every scrap of information they can collect. Alone at the top of an immense administrative pyramid, Stalin knows everything. He is omnipotent. To assist him in this colossal job, he has 4 secretaries who are on call 24 hours a day. Distant and methodical, Stalin always proceeds in the same manner.
Ну, чье сегодня дежурство? Идешь, приходишь, стучишься, встречает Сталин. Он говорил: товарищ, будем работать. Приходила, стучала в дверь, он встречал, отодвигал стул и говорил: садитесь, я диктую. И диктовал. Потом спрашивал: товарищ, через сколько времени принесете стенограмму? Минут через 40, хорошо. Чтобы запятых нельзя было и точек сделать неправильно. Если писала неграмотно или говорила неграмотно, как вот теперь говорят, увольняли.
Stalin examines the list of the condemned alone in secret. The personnel of the Politburo must not know that he is the one who condemns those thousands of innocent people. He crosses out a name from time to time, an old comrade exiled with him in Siberia when he was a young revolutionary, or an old Georgian Bolshevik like himself. As for the others, a simple cross in the margin suffices to send them to their deaths. On this same list, Stalin also adds the names of people who are currently at work right across the hall.
Каждый день, где я работал в аппарате ЦК партии, были на кабинетах дощечки. Начальник такого-то отдела, фамилия его, имя, отчество. Начальник такого. Приходили, его нет. Спрашивали: арестован, враг народа. И мы верили. Пришли к нам арестовывать Алексея Захаровича Лебедева. Вот. Сказали: будете здесь жить. Я побежала за Алексеем Захаровичем и говорю: Леня, Леня, неужели ты враг? Он мне ответил: я чист, как слеза младенца. Тебя я обязательно найду. Но больше этот человек в моей жизни не появился. Никогда я его больше не встретил. Оказывается, он был расстрелян через полгода. Через 2 месяца после ареста Катукова была арестована я. Следователь у меня был по фамилии Эпштейн. Допрашивал меня, бил меня, насиловал. И вот до сих пор я ношу следы битвы его пряжки. У него был ремень с большой железной пряжкой. Он меня бил. Вы можете потрогать эту шишку, она видна. Даже до сих пор, столько лет прошло, она при мне.
All of Stalin's collaborators were sent throughout the country to verify that the death sentences were carried out, a way for Stalin to make them his accomplices. They could not later accuse him of crimes that they themselves had also been involved in. Anastas Mikoyan, one of Stalin's principal ministers, was one of them. His son remembers.
Обычно фигурируют этими списками на расстрел. Причем, вы знаете, это сейчас вот нормальному человеку подумать, это вообще страшно. Вы представляете, список. Никаких там ни свидетельских показаний, ничего, список. Вот список подписывают, расстрелять.
The families of the condemned were also to be eliminated.
Хотя бы такую деталь. Когда выше постановление, он выпустил, что с 14 лет уже можно расстреливать. По 15-16 лет расстреливали. Это я знаю. Были. Что это за человек? Это зверь? Он был абсолютно безжалостный человек.
Today is Thursday, the 24th of November, 1938. Stalin has just signed the last list of people sentenced to death during the Great Purge. One last thing remains for him to do: designate someone to take the blame for all of these crimes. Just 3 hours after it began, the Abu Salim prison revolt has exploded out of control, but Gaddafi still hasn't realized how grave the situation is. He returns to his room where one of his victims awaits him. These women come from all levels of society. They are taken from their families and brought before the Supreme Guide without anyone daring to protest. They are abused, made to endure the worst humiliations, and often beaten. In 1983, Gaddafi created a military academy reserved for women whom he called his Amazons. They were supposed to represent one aspect of modern Libya, the Guide's liberation of women. They are his personal guard and surround him during all his public appearances. In fact, these Amazons constitute a gigantic harem of more than 400 young women at the dictator's disposal. But that is not enough for him.
ولا هذه خشت فقط يضرب ايده يحط ايده على كتفها الحين يحط ايده على كتفها خلاص وين هو في من يلهب الموضوع هذا ويجيبها
اللي معاه فلمجرد انها بيلمس واحده من البنات هو الحارسه هذه بتمشي تتكلم معاها وتاخذ رقم تليفونها فكان بيتم جلبها عن طريق والله كلهم اغلبيه البنات هم كل البنات اللي تم جلبهم للباب العزيزيه كان بأمره هو كان بأنه هو حط يد عليهم وشافهم في موقف آخر طالبة في الجامعة عائلة من داخل عائلة كان الاختيار هيك يكون.
A problem for Gaddafi arose when a girl became pregnant. To discreetly solve this, he had a clinic built in the basement of the university where abortions could be performed.
العيادة وبيت متكامل بالعديد من الحجرات بالحمام بالمطبخ وغيره إلى جانب عيادة قريبة منا جدا. يعني لاحظوا نحن نمر على هذا المكان يوميا طيلة السنة الجامعية ولم نلاحظ شيء. فحقيقة يعني كان أمر غريب. جامعة بقدسيتها كلية القانون بمكانتها بقدسيتها نجد بجانبها للأسف الشديد بيت للدعارة وعيادة نسائية متكاملة بجانب كلية القانون.
In this way, hundreds of women were raped by Gaddafi, by his sons, and even by his men. Amin waits for his mercenaries to confirm that his cousin, Charles Arube, has been assassinated. The stakes are enormous. It's the most dangerous putsch attempt that he has ever had to face. But he is confident. He has a private army of 18,000 men that he pays by pilfering the state budget. These are actual death squads that terrify the entire country.
The time of Amin was a time of terror. We were in fear at that time, great fear of the soldiers. See.
Mohamed Kisambira was Amin's banker before being imprisoned like many of the tyrant's collaborators.
The method of killing people was by hitting them on the head with a hammer. See. So the civilian population was terrified because of the acts of the soldiers of Amin. People were instilled with fear.
But this time, Amin's mercenaries have failed. He has just learned that they have been ambushed and killed by his cousin Arube's men.
Charles Arube and 3 other fellow Kakwas instigated a coup d'etat. They took up positions in the key areas of the radio, television, and important government houses and thought they had captured power.
Charles Arube seems on the verge of winning the battle. Amin assembles his troops to launch a counterattack.
I can remember that day our father came in, putting on his revolvers, each and everything. Then for him, he was in the office with other soldiers. So many soldiers came at home in State House. They were going in the meeting like something, but we couldn't know what was going on wrong.
Amin gives his mercenaries the order to surround the building where Arube and his men have regrouped and to await his orders before killing them. This afternoon, Stalin has summoned Nikolai Yezhov, the chief of secret police. A brilliant strategist, Stalin has already foreseen needing to sacrifice him when the Great Terror began a year and a half ago. He had immediately seen how to use this cruel man, nicknamed the Bloody Dwarf. A little apparatchik willing to do anything to win his master's trust. Yezhov had overseen executions throughout the empire and did not hesitate to torture and kill with his own hands at the terrible prison of Lubyanka. From July 1937 until this day in November of 1938, Yezhov, leader of the Great Purge, under Stalin's orders, had had 770,000 people executed with a bullet to the temple. To encourage him, Stalin made him one of the great heroes of the regime. His portraits were carried triumphantly by the crowd. He was applauded by the Politburo, and he went on vacation with the highest dignitaries of the regime. But today, Yezhov is frightened. For some time now, he has sensed his disgrace drawing nearer. The only thing he hopes to save is his own head. But Stalin has signed his last list of death sentences. Now he needs a scapegoat. Cynically, he accuses Yezhov of the worst crimes. He calls him a rat, a bloodthirsty renegade. He accuses him of having massacred hundreds of innocent people behind his back, and of being a spy on payroll for the British, the Germans, and the Japanese. He even charges him with being an alcoholic, a degenerate, and a sodomite, all chief accusations that will serve to condemn him. Yezhov doesn't even try to defend himself. He knows that once Stalin has decided to condemn someone, nothing can stop him. His fate is sealed. But Yezhov isn't only afraid for his own life, he is also afraid for his daughter, Natalia, who was only 10 years old when he was arrested and knew nothing about what her father did.
Меня очень любил, он очень меня любил, я это чувствовала, потому что я его так встречала всегда, и он такой радостный всегда был. Я вот сейчас все время думаю иногда так, ну не иногда, уже давно думаю, что в одном человеке вот как могло уживаться два человека. Такой вроде как кровожадный, да, и такой добрый.
Only once, when she was 6 years old, did she suspect what her father's work entailed.
Мы с ним играли в прятки. Нас только вдвое и было там, детей вообще не было. И вот я спряталась в отцовском кабинете. Он был открыт нечаянно как-то, не закрытый. И я и там сижу, и альбом лежит рядом. Ну, я что делать? Он там по мне пускай ищет. Я начала листать, а там мертвые дети. Прямо вот детишки лежат, кто без ножки, кто без ручки. Все убитые. Я как заорала, вылетела оттуда. У него вообще было 3 класса образования. И он какой-то был рабочий питерский просто. А потом его начали так вот двигать, и выскочил он куда. Сталину это было на руку, потому что он исполнял все абсолютно. Все. Он его использовал капитально. Его расстреляли 4 февраля. Он его пытал. Его когда повели на допрос, ему сразу сломали руку. А он же худенький, этот маленький, ну, просил не трогать родню, что они ни в чем не виноваты, и очень прошу воспитать мою дочь. Это под дулом пистолета он про меня вспомнил. Мне было так немножко и жутко, и как-то, ну, приятно, что ли. Как-то волнительно.
From that day on, Natalia was confined to an orphanage in the north of Russia until she reached adulthood. She didn't find out what had happened to her father until years later. She was never allowed to use the name Yezhov again. Today she lives alone in the same area where she had once been deported. Once the Yezhov matter is wrapped up, Stalin pays a visit to his children, just as he does each day. They have been looked after by a nanny since their mother, Nadia, committed suicide. Stalin reviews their homework and signs the school notebooks of Svetlana, 12 years old, and Vasily, 18. He especially adores his daughter and is very affectionate towards her. He takes time to play with her and invents a game in which she's the boss who gives him orders, which he obeys with pleasure.
Дело все в том, что Света была девочкой послушная. Сталин Светлану любил. Она была его надежда. Она хорошо училась. Они переписывались все время. Она ему писала какие-то письма-записочки. Он ей присылал какие-то письма-записочки. Он ее иногда брал с собой, Сталин ее брал с собой отдыхать на юг.
But Svetlana, who lives in a cocoon, notices that many members of her family and friends have disappeared. She would write, "But where did they all go? Why is our house so empty?" More and more, I felt the loneliness and the emptiness around me, a desert world where my school and my nanny were all that was left. Inside the concealed camp underneath his fortified villa, Gaddafi has had a nuclear bomb shelter constructed along with a network of 40 kilometers of tunnels, all buried 6 meters below the surface. A veritable underground city with bedrooms, salons, sports facilities, a clinic, and a television studio. Television is his principal tool of propaganda, and he supervises all the programs himself. While he is viewing one of his speeches, taped a few hours earlier, his brother-in-law, Abdullah Sanusi, chief of intelligence, arrives to announce the bad news. More than 1,000 prisoners have ransacked Abu Salim prison. Using sledgehammers, they've forced open the cells in buildings 3 and 4. They're on the verge of escaping, and the guards can no longer contain them. Abu Salim consists of 4 buildings. Fatih Saad, a prisoner in Building 1, where the doors remained closed, describes what happened.
قطعة واحد وقطعة اثنين ما فتحوش عليهم قعدوا وبعد ذلك بدأ التفاوض. جي عبد الله السنوسي وجو الناس بدوا يشاوروا فيهم ما استجابوش. فبعد ذلك جاء أمر من الأوامر من القذافي نفسه تفصيليا قال على أساس الجماعة 1 و2 طلعوهم لسجن آخر.
Gaddafi orders that the prisoners who did not escape be evacuated and orders Sanusi to hold off the rioters. The evacuation would take all night. It is midnight. Amin returns to his room. Everything has worked out according to plan. Arube thought his coup d'etat was a success, but he made the mistake of ceasing combat and going to celebrate the victory with his men in one of the barracks. Meanwhile, Amin Dada's mercenaries spread out quietly all around the area without Arube's troops realizing it. One by one, all the soldiers posted outside the building are neutralized. Once in position, Amin's men inform him that they are ready to launch the assault. Amin tells them to wait and manages to reach Arube on the phone inside the barracks.
He called Charles Arube. And Charles Arube, when he grabbed the phone, he felt that the gentleman was intoxicated and he seemed to be celebrating. They're talking on phone, and with tears on his eyes while he's talking to me, Dad explained that angle. He said, my mother gave you to me and told me to look after you. After all this, you want to take power away from me. You come and betray me. And he's crying. I'm talking about my dad. Tears. So he was remembering a very painful thing. Charles Arubé answered, it is good for a Christian who is educated to rule. He said, Charles Arubé, look outside the window. Charles had put his people out. When he looked in the positions, he did not see any of his people. And he saw different vehicles. He said, you are surrounded. Huh? When the phone went off, he called the radio call of the people outside. And they answered him, they just had a bullet inside. That is a painful truth which, amongst us Kakwas, we had to go through a cultural cleansing because brothers had fought and blood had spilled.
Whether he committed suicide or, more likely, was killed by Amin's men, Charles Arubé is dead. Today, Amin has escaped the most threatening putsch he has ever had to face. But there remains one last thing for him to do before definitely finishing with Charles Arubé. His body had been taken to the Kampala morgue. Amin must now honor a Kakwa's warrior ritual.
If you taste the blood of some of your victims, then you will be protected. In order to appease the spirit of those you've killed or those who you've brutalized, if you taste their blood, you can cushion your punishment. Amin himself believed in these things.
Nobody was present at the scene, but it is very probable that Amin, as per his beliefs, stuck a knife in Arubé's side to drink a little of his blood and thereby capture his spirit so that it could not avenge itself. After a long day well spent, Stalin reclines on his old sofa, listening to his favorite piece, Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 23. Alone in the early morning, in his immense dacha, the dictator has every reason to be satisfied. On this 24th of November, 1938, he has eliminated all his enemies, and he is now the absolute ruler of the Soviet Union. Gaddafi awaits confirmation that buildings 1 and 2 have been evacuated. Sanusi, chief of intelligence, phones him. The evacuation has been completed. All the prisoners that have rioted in buildings 3 and 4 are now massed in the courtyard. They are enraged. The situation is explosive. There's no time to lose. Gaddafi orders the execution of the 1,270 prisoners. It is 8:30. Positioned on top of the prison roofs, the soldiers begin firing at the trapped prisoners.
Suddenly, a military force arrived and literally started shooting into the prison, killing over 1,200 prisoners in a massacre that took hours. This was not something that was just over in a few minutes. They kept shooting and shooting and shooting till just about everybody in these 2 wards were dead. Ultimately, Gaddafi's own demise is very much linked to that decision to commit a massacre at Abu Salim, because that is the spark which set off the revolution in 2011.
In fact, in February 2011, at the height of the Arab Spring, the mothers, sisters, and widows of the men killed at Abu Salim take to the streets, demanding to know the exact truth about the circumstances of the massacre. The police intervene and fire at the crowd, which unleashes the first violent confrontations and the beginning of a revolution throughout Libya that would rage for 9 months, and would end with the lynching of Gaddafi by his own people. Years earlier, in one of his texts, Gaddafi had written, "How I love the freedom of crowds, their enthusiastic spirit after their chains are cast off, when they burst out with a cry of joy and sing, instead of wailing in sorrow. But how I fear and mistrust them, and how cruel they are when they are angry. They plotted against Hannibal and made him drink poison. They burned Savonarola at the stake, sent Danton to the guillotine, fractured Robespierre's jaw, dragged Mussolini's body through the streets, spit in Richard Nixon's face." He dies at the age of 69 after having reigned over Libya for 42 years. In 1979, when the Tanzanian army invaded Uganda, Idi Amin Dada fled to Saudi Arabia and lived in exile there until death. In his last interview, he said, "I have no remorse, only nostalgia." He died in 2003 at age 75 without ever being prosecuted. His reign lasted 8 years, resulting in the death of 300,000 people. Today, Uganda's government is no longer a dictatorship, but the prisons and torture chambers where hundreds of thousands were massacred are still there, abandoned in the forest. On March 1st, 1953, Stalin, shut away in his office, did not appear for the entire day. His entourage didn't dare disturb him. When at last the Kremlin courier entered the office, he found Stalin unconscious, lying on the floor, the victim of a major stroke. His agony lasted 5 days. He was 75 years old. Stalin died the same way that he governed, alone in his office. The man who was responsible for the death of over 20 million people died at the summit of his power, mourned by millions of Soviets and even by some of his victims. He had created a system that would outlast him for over 35 years.